Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I am here every Wednesday from noon Eastern Standard Time, usually half an hour. We take a topic, we deep dive, having a good time while doing it. Um, as you guys are jumping on and watching, do me a favor, give me a shout. Let me see who's out there. Let me check the comments right now. Jesse, what's going on, brother, man? Johnny Groob in the house. Good to see you guys. I appreciate, just so you guys know, the regulars that show up every week, and you guys give me a lot of good feedback, and the interactions that we have usually add more depth to the conversations. Usually there's a framework that I want to share. Most of the time, realistically, it's against the backdrop of something in current events that has inspired me to want to talk about it formulaically. Sometimes we get into the specifics of what's happening current event wise and get into some actual applications and commentary. But it's always a more enjoyable conversation on my end when you guys are here having it with me. So, Aaron, what's up, darling? Good to see you. One of my favorite Canadians. And hopefully Jamie's doing well. Hopefully he's there too. But we have, I think, a pretty good topic planned today. And the idea of this concept of being too weak to live, it was actually born out of a conversation I was having with my buddy Tuan Tom one day. And he was, I think, accurately. What's up, Corey? Tuan Tom was accurately describing somebody who is dead, somebody who dies, as being too weak to live at that point. And so the context of the conversation I was having with Tuan Tom that time was about, when their life actually ends. For my purposes today, the concept or the context of living is not in terms of being alive or dying, but it's really in the more abstract notion of the quality of life, the passion and enjoyment, fulfillment, and what have you, that adds more value to a life lived. So that is the context, that is the backdrop of what I want to talk about today. And Jamie, what's up, brother, man? I knew you were around somewhere. Good to see you. And today, in today's email, well, let me do that. Responsible content creator, I have to remind you that if you are not getting my emails in the morning, they are free and you should do so. I always talk about different topics and I share my take on some things, sometimes a little bit more controversially than others. But I also talk about all the other things I'm into, and I can get a little bit more transparent, aggressive, authentic, however you want to describe it, on emails than I can on these platforms. You know that. I'll be honest too. Like a lot of times I'll watch other videos on YouTube and whatnot, and they'll be following a code. They'll refer to something, by some representative term or something. And I'm really like, oh shit, we're not allowed to say that either anymore. So I'm always breaking the rules. I really do not invest a lot of time in learning them effectively, admittedly, because I think that I get the gist out of what I'm trying to say. And if I wind up getting demonetized as a result of it, then so be it. I would say, fortunate to not rely on social media, specifically, YouTube ad revenue and whatnot to make a living. So I pretty much can say what I want to say, so long as I don't get my page shut down, and or I should say shut down again, right? So who we got here? Magoo, what's up, brother, man? Good to see you. Judge Cohen in the house. That's right, Judge Cohen, habitual line stepper. And, how else do you know where it is, right? So that being said, the topic of today, I added some things in today's email. And the links for getting on my emails are down in the description and whatnot. But in today's email, I posed a couple of questions. Number one was, how strong does a man have to be in order to live? right? How strong does a man have to be in order to live? And again, the context of that is talking about the quality of the value of one's living, not necessarily, is he literally alive and not dead? So if you guys are not familiar with, I prepared a very high level graphic for you guys for today from, if you guys have ever seen my prep zone. And it's a framework that I use to describe what I call a zone of function where dysfunction is on either end. And if we're talking about being prepared, the first time I showed this publicly and outside of my coaching was when we were going through COVID. And I said, there is a line where we are now considered to be prepared. And then there is an optimizing of preparation. Below that line of being prepared, we would say we are unprepared, right? And unprepared would be dysfunctional. And then we're prepared, so we're functional, we're better prepared. But then at some point, we can be too prepared and we become dysfunctional again. And in that particular context of preparation, we would call being too prepared paranoid, right? And this high level graphic I prepared right here. And I will show you guys exactly what that is, right? So we have at the bottom a line of dysfunction. And then at that point, where the hell are we? Let's use this finger, it's closer. At that point, we have a minimum level of function. And then we have a process of optimization to a maximum level of function. And then there is usually another line where it once again becomes dysfunctional. I gave you the example of somebody who is now paranoid because we could say they are too prepared, right? That would be an example of that. And that function zone framework, when applied to living, I would describe as the individual who is probably trying to get more control than is necessary. And in trying to control more than is necessary, or even possible, I would say, trying to control more than is possible, he winds up living what I would call a small life. Because here's the thing, when you have an individual who is so fragile, so vulnerable, so insecure, it manifests in different ways. I would say a lot of the ways that it manifests can usually be reduced to him trying to get more control than he has available. And in the pursuit of that dysfunctional level of control, what winds up happening is they wind up shrinking their lives because a smaller life is much easier to control than a larger life. And the variables of a smaller life usually, I would say, fall, if it is in fact functional, on the lower end of what is considered to be a functional life, meaning the quality of life, the amount of living one does is much lower when they are living a small life because of their need to have a disproportionate amount of control. You'll see individuals that do this whereby they grow up, and mind you, not all the time is this something that's a product of a conscious decision, but you have somebody that grows up in a small town, and in that small town, he has certain consistencies that he is reliant upon, and it could be the seasons, it could be this time of year is the harvest, right? Everybody in town goes to their farms and it's the harvest season. And I'm making shit up because I don't really know a lot about that lifestyle, but meaning he has a certain level of expectation in life that it's really based on his reduced exposure to the world, as you know, in a larger sense. So as soon as he would move out of that smaller town, he would lose the ability to relate to his environment at a level that he needs in order to feel secure about who he is. So you'll have some people that are scared to move out of the small town, to just put it simply. And these people tend to reduce their lives to the scale of the experiences that could be, acquired in that small town living. Again, not a value judgment, but if we're talking about the size or the breadth or the scale of one's life, obviously it's a reduction to reduce the environments to which you're exposed. There's going to be a certain level of consistency, and in that consistency eventually breeds control, and that control breeds security. So these people tend to find security in those types of environments. I would say that that is a lower level of living, right? In terms of the overall value of one's experiences. Again, I don't mean value in terms of morality, or there's some sort of everybody should look to live the largest life possible. I don't think some people are designed for that. I don't think that some people are even afforded the pressure to be able to do that, and they are afforded the ability to prefer a smaller life. Like, you can get away with that in today's society to some extent, right? So as we start looking up, what is the thing that allows somebody to add more value in his life? I would argue, to put simply, it is strength, right? So strength, to again define terms, I have defined strength as the willingness to climb the ladder of one's self-power. Weakness is the rejection of that climb. It is the reluctance to climb, or the rejection of climbing at all. Some people could be strong for a spell, and then they achieve a certain level of what they would say is success. I would say is security. And in being exposed to this new level of security, they sort of change their approach to living, and they stop looking to maintain that strength that got them there in the first place. How I would apply that to the analogy or the metaphor of the ladder is they climbed right up until a certain rung, and they fell in love with that rung. So at that point, they decide to not climb, and they decide to reject the idea or the pressures they've received from everybody else to continue climbing. I would say that we can call that late onset weakness, right? It's where you're strong for as long as you need to be, but not stronger by way of standard once you have a functional level of security, right? So when I'm looking at people who have fragile philosophies, people who are overly emotional, sometimes you'll have the people that, they overtly appear and act like somebody who walks through life scared. There's somebody who is risk averse, and maybe even they are very expressive in their risk aversion. They think it is foolish or even stupid to take a risk unnecessarily, despite the potential for a return on that investment of exposing ones to risk. They don't think it's worth it. These are the people who yell at everybody for riding a motorcycle, or, why would you start a business? Why don't you get a good job? Or, why would you go to the military? Or why would you travel? You should go to school. And they're always looking to sort of follow the path that is often being laid by others, because ultimately what they're trying to achieve is the approval of those other people. So, of course, the tendency of where they're going to direct their lives is going to be those paths that other people have laid before them, right? So how strong does a man have to be in order to live? Well, not very strong. And this is kind of the point, that there is a spectrum of behavior. And just because your bills are paid, just because you have a couple of material assets that you've always aspired to have, does not mean that you are now exempt from, I would say, the pressure to continue the climb. So you don't have to be that strong to live. And in order to live, or if you are one who is living a functional life, that is not, and I think this is the point of it, that is not an argument for you being strong. It's like, no, well, you've been strong enough to get there. Somebody who can say to have an attribute that is connected to a certain type of behavior is not reliant upon being prompted by his environment to exhibit that behavior. I would say when we are dedicated or committed to exhibiting a certain type of behavior or maintaining a certain attribute, we would say we could label that standards, right? We could say that is a standard that the individual has, because despite what is happening in the environment, that is still something he is going to pursue, maintain, exhibit, etc. It is not beholden to the interaction of his environment, right? So there are a lot of people who, I don't know, and I'm just picking an example out of the air here. If you're an individual who has met somebody that has taken advantage at some point, maybe they stole something from you, maybe they went back on their word, or they promised or committed themselves to doing something that they wound up not doing. Whatever it is, we have to understand that chances are when we set that expectation and how they were going to conduct themselves, that eventually led to us being let down by them. Usually it's based on some relationship whereby they didn't exhibit behavior that would match that type of outcome. It's like when I ask somebody, hey, do you want to let's start a business together, and he says, yeah, let's do it. It's because I have recognized in him the attributes that I attribute to him having standards that would serve well in a partnership in some sort of business endeavor. So when he reveals himself to be somebody else after we've made that commitment, I can't say that it wasn't based on nothing, right? So when you have an individual that is strong by standard as opposed to strong by circumstance, I think that you'll see somebody who over time will climb that spectrum, right? That value spectrum to having a life that's not only more valuable, but it's also one that exists usually on a larger scale of some sort. And the scale doesn't mean that he has more shit or that he knows more people. It's really he exposes himself to new experiences. He acquires new skills and abilities. Sure, he makes new alliances, but he's also able to sort of add a depth to his perspective that is informed by these newer experiences. If you're asking somebody who's only ever lived in a small town about world affairs, it's not that they don't have a valid opinion or take on these things, but you understand that the majority of their take is being designed by a perspective that is very limited in scope. And somebody could usually ways that an individual could transcend that limitation is through education, through reading, through having great conversations with people who have had these experiences, or reading works written by people who were looking to share the wisdom that they got from these experiences. So obviously there's a way to sort of bridge that gap, but I don't think it is unreasonable to expect these people to be biased by the limitation of their exposure to these new experiences, as it were, right? So I think when we're looking at, are we going from a minimal functional life, we could say a small life. Let's add some labels here so I don't have to go through the whole description. We have, in the realm of the functional scale of a life, we could have a small life and we can have an optimized life, right? And a small life is a life that is kept to a level of control, right? So it is designed according to the amount of control that the individual needs to have. At the top end of that spectrum, it is really a balanced approach to prioritizing movement and learning and expansion and growth over control. So there's a lack of control, but that exposure to a new experience where no control yet exists sets the tone for the relationship to be built with that new skill, to where control eventually can be acquired. I'll give some examples of this. I recently, this past weekend, thinking of Tuan Tom and the guys, I was one of the instructors at the Modern Warrior Conference, right? This year's Modern Warrior Conference. Next year, it's going to be in the spring. It's going to be down in Texas. It's going to be awesome. But anyway, I was one of the 4 instructors. So it's myself, Tuan Tom, Bill Rapier, and Tuan Harley Elmore. And the 4 of us are instructors. These are 3 of the most just incredible instructors I've ever been exposed to. And a very common experience for me, being one of the instructors in this event, is I also attend the instruction of the other instructors because they're that good, and I wouldn't pass on the opportunity. But one of the things that I also bring to the experience of the collective of us is that I've also run uh, different business groups, and I've done business consulting. So I also have some administrative capabilities. I also have some marketing capabilities, some logistical capabilities. And not that they don't have it, but it is something that I have actually spent a lot of time investing in building a relationship in. And there are a lot of those things, and I'm very honored to be in this position that those guys sort of count on me to bring to the table. And the fact that I expanded beyond what I originally saw my skill set as being 20 years ago is a testament to that growth and the value and my ability to not only be more valuable to myself, but the people around me. If I look back, 20 years ago, I'm a jujitsu guy, and as I opened my first academy, it was that was the thing. Everything I was going to do was going to be in the world of jujitsu. And as I get new experiences in those first couple of years, I start expanding my skill set. I start expanding my interest. I start asking myself, am I really going to optimize my life at a higher level if I just stay in this, this small pond, so to speak, continuing to master the variables that are there? And a lot of times that's what you'll get. You'll get somebody who has a level of specialization and the success that came along with his specialization. And he is comfortable staying in that one environment. Again, this isn't a value judgment. I'm just describing the variables and what I see as if somebody says they want to live a full life, an optimized life, they really want to, I go back to the Hobbit, books where it's like, just this idea of going on adventure because you just want to have more experiences. That was something that drove me. It continues to drive me. And I think fast forward 20 years later, when I look at all the things that I've done, it is a testament to just rejecting the idea that I should just stay there because I was good at it. I should just stay there because the money was good while I was there, or any other variable, the control, the status that I had, and it's just not who I think I am temperament wise. So I've always been looking, I've always looked to broaden my horizons. I've always looked to expose myself to different skills and experiences, And so another question we have here that I wrote in the email is, how can they stay ahead of the curve? How can they stay? Well, no, there was a question I skipped there. All right, here it is. What is the price men pay as the world becomes more comfortable and convenient? So now here is some value, I think, when making this observation. Society is becoming weaker. Society is becoming weaker because it is allowed to become weaker, because this is the first time in history where there is no consequence for becoming weaker. You could be out of shape. You could not be able to provide for yourself. You could not be able to protect yourself and those you care about. Like all of these attributes that were at the foundation, the core of what it meant to be a useful man, we now have other entities doing for us. And I think for the most part, it would be foolish to expect people to again exhibit behavior that was only being exhibited because of the requirement of the environment in which they were living. Meaning, a lot of people were tough because they had to be tough. They were survivors because they had to survive, right? They were creative because they had to be creative. But as soon as the environmentally driven need for those aspects of who they are dissipates, those attributes fall by the wayside, almost in lockstep. There are individuals who, and I don't want to, I have family that watches these things, and I don't want to throw too many family members under the bus, but sometimes these examples just pop in my head on their own, right? So I have a couple of family members that lived in Puerto Rico and worked hard every day of their life. They moved to the US and they worked hard every day up until they were given the opportunity to not have to work hard. Because of the welfare state of the country, they were given options where they didn't have to work as hard. They didn't have to do all these things that were uncomfortable and working long hours, 7 days a week. And we could have the argument as to the value of it one way or the other. I think everybody understands my take on it. But what I will say is, as soon as they were given the opportunity to not have to work hard, they never worked hard another day in their lives. And I think that is telling. So when we look at who we are and we try to value who we are just by the accumulation of things that we have, what we do is we discount the value, or we discount the participation of our environment in the acquisition of those things. When I started training, Laurie, what's up? Good to see you. Monk, what's going on? When I started training martial arts, I don't think anybody who's known me growing up was surprised that I started fighting and I started training and stuff like that. But there is a certain point where over the years, I'll have people, I own a school. Like, I've had family and friends who I'm like, you got to train, you got to train, you got to train. And a very common rebuttal, right, or rejection to my offer was, like, I don't need to train that. And I can't argue with them. I know plenty of people that have lived long lives without ever getting into a fight, without ever having anything violent, happen to them. And in this type of society, that is certainly something that could occur. But the difference between me and those individuals' approach to our lives is I am not looking at the environment as the feedback loop on whether or not I should do these things. I'm looking at the attributes. And what are the attributes that I want as a man? What do I want to represent? And the people who do adorn those attributes, the people who do have the reputations as being those respectable men, what are the things that they do? So it's not about, it's sort of like, the people who don't shower if they're not leaving the house, or if there's some sort of, and I'm just using this as an example, sort of hygienic ritual that if they're not seeing anybody, they're not going to do it. It's like, I'm not saying it's good or bad, right or wrong, whatever. I'm just saying the environment is dictating who they are to themselves. I'm somebody, every day I wake up, I shower, I shave, I do all the, like, just again, you're using this as an example. There's something that I do. I am an entrepreneur. I am somebody who owns a few businesses. I don't really have anywhere to be every single day. But if I don't do those things, I realize that I start to devolve into this creature of comfort. I start to look at my rituals as just being a collection of things I do to feel good during the day. And I, being the pressure to power guy, like I am just fundamentally opposed to approaching the opportunities that being alive affords me to that sort of mindset. So when I look at individuals who are living comfortable lives, are living convenient lives, I would ask, if they're really aware of what that does to their personal level of power, right? What that does to the ability for them to climb that ladder of becoming minimally functional in living to an optimized, what we would call a great life, a life worth living, right? We say that, as a phrase, but what we're referring to when we say that is a life that at the end of which we could look back and said, I had a great time living. The alternative would be the people who are so risk averse, the people who are such control freaks. A joke that I've made with people when they, sort of rebut or try to debunk some of my approaches to living, they'll talk about the risk, and they'll talk about, it's just, why would you do that? You can get hurt, you're doing that. And it's like, yeah, well, how healthy are you going to be when you die? Right. because that's the joke of it. It's like, well, by the way, we're all fucking dying. Right. When I die, I want to die with the fucking wheels coming off. Like, I want to be somebody who is not, I think I'm already past that point now, but like the injuries I have, like you look at my fucking forehead, all the scars that I've acquired over the years, the different stitches that I've had on my, like I've had a rough physical life. But when I say I've led a rough life, that is something that is positive in my um, looking back on it. Like I know plenty of people who don't have any scars, who don't have any injuries, who don't have any um, sort of skills or assets that were born out of those behaviors that exposed me to the bumps and bruises that I experienced while doing them. And again, at the end of the day, I even look at, what's my value to other men? I coach men. Well, what is the thing? Like, what makes me so fucking special? And I'm not perfect by any means. I don't have all the answers, certainly by any means, but I am somebody who's been through some shit. And it turns out that learning how to traverse some of the obstacles that I face has given me some perspectives, has given me some solutions, some frameworks and formulas to produce those solutions. And it turns out that other men have value for those things. They value my ability to apply what have been experiences that I've been able to endure, applying the logic and the wisdom that came from them into their invest in my coaching for. That's something that I would not even be able to do if I was one of these people that just sat alone in a room thinking great thoughts and trying to figure things out with absolutely no feedback loop of reality involved, like so many people tend to do in a society like this. Let me see what we got here. Jamie writes, strong men create easy times, and so must also be wise enough to create and maintain rituals of strength rather than letting their offspring to be raised by circumstance. Absolutely right. And I would get that all the time for martial arts training or even lifting weights. One of the things that Americans will often get from people in other countries or the left political side of America: why do you carry a firearm? Why do you have a gun? What are you scared of? Are you scared somebody's going to get you? And it's just a paradigm that you could tell, like, yeah, if your logic hasn't answered that question for you already, the road you're trying to take me down doesn't have the answer either. And it's one of those things where, yeah, if you don't get it enough to even ask that question, you're not probably going to get it as a result of my response to that question. And it's really just a paradigm shift. There are plenty of people who are like, why would I have to learn how to defend my family? I could just call the police. And let's say the police were right next door and the response time was seconds. Let's say that whole thing was figured out somehow, right? It is still fundamentally an issue for the man who relies on the police, because in his reliance upon the police, he removes his ability to do it himself should the need arise. And I think when we look at what has allowed us to successfully navigate engaging this planet as long as we have as a species, there are some universal formulas that we cannot become disconnected to. There are so many examples of this, more than I would even begin to list now. But an easy one I recall was a couple of years ago, where there was a fuel shortage in New York City, right? Gas shortage. And you would have cars lining up for hours to go to gas stations. And day in and day out, for however many days this lasted, cars would be waiting online 4, 5, 6 hours. Eventually, the station runs out of gas because the usage is just well beyond what they're prepared for. And then people would be damn near rioting as a result of it, as if they could not understand that the gas station literally ran out of gas. That was a concept they couldn't wrap their head around because they hadn't accommodated that possibility. So they had no plan B. So they had to double down on plan A. No, you're going to have gas, because I don't know what the fuck else to do if you don't. Well, this whole time, and this was the joke of it to me, at the entire time that this was going on, they could have driven a car 45 minutes into Connecticut, and every single gas station, the majority of gas stations there were completely unaffected by this. But that wasn't even something that people looked to do. Why? Because they are devoid of the mindset that leads to that conclusion, because they've never had to problem solve in this particular area of their life. Why? Because the supermarkets always have food, the gas stations always have gas, the trains or buses are always running. Like, these are just these things that, because they have such a degree of certainty and reliance upon, they've no longer invested energy in maintaining those capabilities on their own. And we're seeing this at a societal level now. All of these attributes that individuals have always maintained out of necessity, but because it was not maintained as a standard of pride of who they were, they allowed these skills to dissipate. My man Goose says those people without scars still have pain. At least we know where we got our scars and pains from. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a great point, because running a martial arts school, as long as we have, there's so many people who we can tell, like, on paper, that's the phrase that I use, like, on paper their lives are crushing it, yet we see them in a very raw, unprotected environment, like a martial arts mat, like a MMA or jiu-jitsu mat, and we give them credit for acknowledging the deficiencies that they've had. And a lot of people with healthy bodies and no scars start realizing in their 30s, 40s, sometimes even 50s, I better learn how to have a relationship with my body, or an application, a relationship with violence, and that aspect of reality. And yeah, the thing is, you put that time in, your body's going to accumulate some bumps and bruises, but that is the thing it's a small price to pay for the individual we get to be as a result of going through that, right? Jamie writes, a fucking book. No. Jamie, I'm going to start making you use ChatGPT to summarize your shit. All right, let's do it. Hold on. All right. The natives used to wonder why the early French were so dumb, despite the fact that the natives tend to be on the lower side of the IQ scale. But at the time, it was connection with natural law. Even an animal builds on natural law and functions within it. When you begin to construct reality on the fundamental premise of external excess of resources, you are going to get some very sophisticated bullshit that is completely dysfunctional. I could not agree more. And when you hear the teenage, college age children of affluent families, railing on about why we need socialism, and why we need to take the money from the rich, like their parents, and give it to these. It's like, yeah, it must be nice to solve the universe's issues from the fucking bubble that you live in. And I think that is a very, very common, deficiency of humans' brain power. We don't know what we don't know a lot of times, and you'll have individuals who are completely disconnected from the bigger picture, doing what I call coming to complete conclusions based on incomplete information, right? And I think when you look at individuals who move away, as Jamie just cited, from a relationship with natural law, they lose the accountability of that natural feedback, right? In TRIBALNOMICS, I call it keeping your feet on the floor, feedback loop of reality. And it's what undermines people's ability to think productively in modern society. It's also in the martial arts world. It's how you go from people who have fought in wars to people who are trying to knock out, somebody on the other side of the room without touching them, and all this other silly nonsense you see being displayed. It's because there's no feedback and there's no consequence for getting it wrong. It's like, yeah, this is, it's why I talk about society being an aquarium, why I named that aquarium Dungeons and Drag Queens. It's like a big role-playing game we get to play where there aren't any real-world consequences, because the abundance of what we enjoy on a societal level, right? Symptoms of surplus. Monk writes, You can be killed in seconds in any self-defense situation. In any self-defense situation, and the police might not be equipped mentally or physically to handle the situation that you might be in, or they might be in on it. The police are depending on who you are and who they may not be trustworthy. So here, you bring up a point. You remind me of a conversation I was having a couple of days ago, where, and again, and I say this in the context because I'll get shit if I get a little too aggressive with this, but when I look at cops who are in a situation where they have to shoot somebody, and they have to kill somebody, and there is nothing logically or policy wise that says they were supposed to do something else. There might be not anything logically that says they could have done anything else, but you'll see somebody in that situation where they draw their weapon and they have to kill somebody. And then you see them mentally break down. I do not see that as something that we should promote or in any way congratulate. He shot that guy dead, but did you see how upset he was? Because I think what we're losing in that exchange is the reasoning that goes to why they should have been shot in the first place. If, you did it according to policy, there was nothing else you could have done, but it's good that you feel bad about it. The counter that somebody will attempt to throw would be, oh, well, it's showing that they're maintaining their humanity, their morality. And again, I will say that's fine. But in that particular context, when elevated, maybe they're less likely to make the shot next time in the same circumstances because of the trauma that they experienced as a result of the first shooting. So it's a slippery slope when we have all of this baggage and somehow we only want to value somebody who suffers when they do something as, admittedly significant as having to take the life of somebody else. So just a thought where that's concerned, right? Derek, my man, Derek, good to see you. Derek, what did I want to tell you? Oh, I have a cousin of mine in Long Island that might be going to your school. I'll hit you up privately, let you know the deal. But I was just talking about you the other day. I'm glad I remembered. I would have felt like a dick if I remembered like an hour from now. Aaron writes, no. I'd rather burn what gas I still have waiting for this one particular gas station. Why would I want to drive to another? Retards. I agree. That's exactly the mindset. And again, it's this entitlement, right? So I've spoken about before, there's a spectrum. On one end, there's gratitude. On the other end, there's entitlement. If you have no gratitude for something, you have to understand that you are entitled to it. Whether or not that's the actual case or that's your right is an aside. It's just the relationship that you have with that particular thing. When I wake up every day, I'm grateful. When I go and see my kids every day, I'm grateful. When I see my wife, I'm grateful. When I turn the light switch on and the lights go on, I'm grateful. When I turn the key on the car and the car turns on, I'm grateful. I'm not sitting there going, thank you all day. It's just a general sort of energy that I keep when engaging these things throughout the day. Because I've been in plenty of situations where you turn the key and the car doesn't turn on, right? Or you go to check the bank account and you didn't realize that they were taking that money out today, and here you are. It's like, okay, I guess I'm eating, here comes the ramen again, for dinner tonight. And I've been in those situations, and being on both sides of that, when I'm on the productive side, I'm always grateful to be there, and I never want to be entitled. And that's something that you'll see with a lot of people in the city. It's really, there's so much being provided for them, and their whole identity is really built without ever having to build a gratitude for those things. Now, the argument is, well, the taxes, those things better work, and that's fine. But understand that that's a societal, alliance, tribal issue. Talking about the relationship of the things for the individuals, because the thing that, you paid for, let's say that I paid for my cable and some line breaks, 20 miles from here and I don't have cable for a week. I could sit there all day saying, well, I paid my bill, I should have cable. But the fact remains that in the real world, there's a wire that broke. And until that wire is fixed, I'm not going to have my situation resolved. And I have to have enough of an understanding that I'm going to live, if I don't have cable, to be able to understand that that is what I have to wait for, but I paid, so I should have it. I paid, so I should have it. It's just not the way the real world works. And again, not that you shouldn't fight for what you're owed, but you shouldn't be losing your identity while you're doing it, right? Derek, right on. I'll send you that message later. All pain is training. That's right. That's right. It's a concept that like a lot of the shit I talk about, and I do it partially on purpose. I think you guys all understand. I don't want to, just explain everything in a way that everybody's going to understand all the time. I want people to do a little bit of processing. I want people to think at first reaction that they disagree with me, and then they let it marinate for a second or two and go, oh, okay, I get what he's saying, because that's the thing. Not enough people are thinking about all of these positions that we hold and all of these variables that we're subjected to. We don't think about it enough, and we don't develop an individual code of who we are, what we stand for, what are our standards. Who am I going to be? Who am I going to be when it's comfortable and uncomfortable to be that individual? These are decisions that we all need to make, right? Right on. All right, let's call it there. That was a good take. I think I delivered what I wanted to. Um, too weak to live. The more you are entitled, the more that you're risk averse, the more that you are addicted to control, the smaller a life you will live. The other side of that is to expose your life to new things, to new experiences, is to number one, to use a martial arts analogy, is to be a white belt in that new thing. It is to have to fall every once in a while, right? Not everything's going to work. Not everything's going to go the way you want it to. But that is the friction that the environment subjects us to make us more as a result, right? People have been adapting to conflict and friction since the dawn of man. And who we are today is a testament to our ability to navigate those obstacles along the way. All right, guys. Good stuff. I appreciate you all. And as always, brothers and sisters, I'll see you next week. But pressure to power.